You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good morning, I'm Fred Childers. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. Well, let's get you caught up on all the latest developments on Louisiana's abortion laws. In Orleans Parish, judges ruled that the case that would determine if Louisiana's abortion trigger laws could go into effect must be taken up in East Baton Rouge Parish. The move has voided the temporary restraining order that allowed the abortion clinics to reopen. It is possible a new order could be granted by a Baton Rouge judge. The date of the new hearing has not yet been set. The New Orleans City Council has adopted a resolution attempting to override the state's new law on abortion. Jordan Lippincott explains what this means for abortion health care in the city.
5 yeas, no nays, and the resolution is adopted.
The New Orleans City Council enacted legislation that would prohibit the City of New Orleans and local law enforcement from using public funds or resources to enforce Louisiana's trigger laws.
That'll mean that NOPD won't prioritize going after women who are seeking reproductive services and won't go after doctors who are seeking reproductive services.
Several speakers voiced their opinions, most supporting the resolution. Abortion rights advocates say the trigger ban will not stop people from getting abortions.
What it will do is stop providers from considering Louisiana a safe place to work and utilize their hard-earned medical licenses and expertise.
Council member at large Helena Moreno says this legislation is not a long-term solution.
I think the question that many have is is this a solution to keeping the New Orleans clinic open? Unfortunately, it is not, because that clinic is regulated by the state.
Some spoke in opposition of the resolution and believe the council is sending the wrong message.
It makes me sad because it just confirms what I thought, and it just brings more darkness here for you all, and it makes me sad.
President Biden is using executive power to hit back at restrictive abortion laws. He signed an executive order on Friday protecting access to abortion and mitigating potential penalties women seeking abortion might face. His executive order also directs agencies to tell medical providers and insurers about how and when they are required to share privileged patient information with authorities. However, this order is limited, restoring access to abortion in the more than a dozen states where strict limits or total bans have gone into effect, like here in Louisiana. Well, that would require an act of Congress. At least 90,000 policyholders being left with no home insurance due to insurance companies leaving the state or not having enough money. Insurance Commissioner Jim Donnellan says multiple laws have been passed this legislative session to avoid that from happening again. Insurance companies are now required to put up $10 million to do property insurance in the state. Before, they were required to put up $3 million.
The reason we're increasing that minimum capital and surplus is to have the owners of those companies have more, as I refer to it, skin in the game, if you will, more of their own money on the table.
Now, another law passed this session that protects renters if they have to evacuate for the storm. There's also a new law that would help a policyholder step-by-step file a complaint about adjusters. The Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development continues to ask for public comment as it gears up to submit a draft of an electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan. DOTD is looking to secure $14 million in federal funding for charging stations throughout the state over the next 5 years. Vanya Joseph reports.
The entire automobile industry, the original equipment manufacturers, have declared that by 2030 to 2035, they're only going to be producing electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles.
Charging forward, DOTD Secretary Sean Wilson says it's time for the state to become a competitor in the world of electric vehicles.
We're looking at $74 million over the next 5 years. These EV charging facilities are going to be level 3 charging facilities, which means it'll take you 20 minutes to charge your battery.
Made possible by President President Biden's Infrastructure and Jobs Act, DOTD plans to build a charging station every 50 miles on the interstate. Wilson says they're building for a diverse future.
The president has laid out a Justice 40 commitment, which ensures that 40% of the benefits of the dollars that we spend are going to be experienced and felt by those that have been underrepresented. If you have food deserts like we see right now, if you have energy deserts, which could be the future for charging these vehicles, where will those folks go?
That means putting charging stations in rural communities too. The investment will also help Louisiana achieve its goal of having net zero emissions by 2050.
We know one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions is our transportation system.
Wilson says these changes won't happen overnight, but this is a start.
This is going to be the evolution of our system, and it's important for Louisiana not to be left behind.
Well, a rash of catalytic converter thefts is slowing down after a new law was passed this year. This new law identifies catalytic converters as precious metals, requiring buyers to keep track of all transactions, decreasing the number of people who buy them. Back in May, the whole state saw a string of thefts. Now, one sheriff says when he saw the number of thefts go up, he had to act.
We went to all the salvage yards in the parish, which there are several. We made a copy of the law and brought it to them with a ledger.
I meant to say catalytic converters. Buyers now have to take a picture of a valid photo ID, get a correct address and phone number from the seller. Legislation passed this year that increases the penalties for the theft of converters as well. Protesters gathered outside the Fifth Circuit of U.S. Court of Appeals in New Orleans this week, demanding that DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, remain in place. This comes after a federal judge in Texas declared it illegal. Amy Russo reports.
Chanting and drumming roaring down the streets of New Orleans. Hundreds of people nationwide gathered outside the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals building to hold a vigil, then marched to Jackson Square, calling for DACA to stay. Signs in hand showcasing several different languages.
I am undocumented, and I will speak out.
Nearly 11 million undocumented immigrants live in the U.S. About 600,000 of them are DACA recipients. Rouge Diana Park is one of them.
Many times our community members live in fear every day of being deported. And if DACA is deemed illegal, then it could pose a greater risk to our community members. And we're tired of living in the dark. We want things to change.
Protesters are also calling for permanent protection for all immigrants to be created this year.
And DACA has just shown us that a temporary solution is not enough.
Many of those protesting say this is the only country they've ever known.
They live here, they work here, they own businesses here, they're medical professionals, they're employees, they're family members, they're parents.
Many fear what could be the end of DACA.
Y si DACA muere, mueren los sueños de muchísimas familias.
And if DACA dies, a lot of the dreams that our youth has die as also.
Amy Russo, WGNO News.
After the break, hear from the Louisiana delegation about the major issues they're fighting in Washington. Stay with us.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. The battle on inflation continues nationwide, and while we're seeing prices start to drop at the pump, some say it's not nearly enough to help average Americans. According to AAA this week, the national average is still $4.72 per gallon. In Louisiana, it's about $4.28 per gallon. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy says the price is falling in the right direction, but the ban on new oil drilling is slowing the process and adding to the current battle with inflation.
It's gutting the American people like a fish. Look, it's put the politics aside for a second. It's hard not to notice that something is very wrong in our country. I mean, inflation is just ravaging the middle and lower class.
Just last week, the Biden administration released a 5-year plan that could open some drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, allowing up to 11 lease sales over the next 5 years. Congressman Mike Johnson is also paid a visit around the district to hear from residents and address their current concerns. He says the biggest and most common concern right now are inflation, immigration, and lack of trust in government issues. Johnson says with these meetings, he can take suggestions back to Washington, D.C.
To be with the people you represent, you have to hear their concerns and their frustrations and be able to take that back and help implement good policy in Washington. So it's an essential part of our job.
Johnson has noticeably been working on trying to repeal vaccine mandates in the military, saying it puts the country at risk to limit those who can enlist. Millions of federal dollars are on the way to the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport. Congressman Troy Carter announced the new funding that includes $5.2 million from the bipartisan infrastructure plan. The money will be used to replace 2 passenger boarding bridges, making the facility more energy efficient and more accessible for those with disabilities. It's not yet clear when those construction projects could begin. Also this week, federal officials broke ground to improve flooding in East Baton Rouge Parish. It's all part of the East Baton Rouge Flood Risk Reduction Project. So far, 2,400 cubic yards of debris have been removed from Jones Creek. With the use of the federal dollars, streams and canals connected to the 5 tributaries will be cleaned as well. With the increasing rates of flood insurance, Congressman Garrett Graves says this is one of the most important projects for the city.
We cannot stop. We've got to keep moving forward, keep making investments, and ensure that when we have rainy days, we don't cause people to tense up and be concerned about flooding again.
Now, this plan will clear and enlarge 50 miles of channels to reduce the risk of flood damage. After Jones Creek, officials say the next step is Bayou Fountain and Ward Creek. The launch of a national mental health hotline is just days away. Advocates are hopeful this will transform how our country helps people in crisis, but there are some doubts that the hotline is ready. 988 will be the number to call for mental health help starting July 16th. Over $1 million has been put aside in Louisiana to get the program up and running with enough operators. LDH says they plan to meet with focus groups to improve the program for Louisianans who need help. Coming up, Senator Cassidy explains his work on abortion, gun reform, and how to deal with inflation. Stay with us.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. Earlier this week, Senator Bill Cassidy traveled around the state to talk about the major issues facing the nation right now, including abortion rights, inflation, and gun reform. He sat down with Reggie Marion. Take a look.
People are calling for Congress to take more action on gun control and abortion rights. U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy is here to address these issues and so much more. Senator Cassidy, thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, Reggie, good to be with you.
Well, we're going to start with abortion because I know that President Biden has said that he is willing to support carving out a filibuster to codify abortion rights. Would you support that?
Of course not. One, I'm pro-life. So I do think that it's important that I think the Supreme Court decision, which returns this to states, is a good decision. It allows democracy to take over. Now, we'll notice in our state, a Democratic state senator, Katrina Jackson, put in our law, signed by a Democratic governor, but passed by a Republican legislature. So on a bipartisan basis, our state feels as if we're pro-life. So let us work through that. I think that the president trying to co-opt what a state, what democracy would have, is part of the problem.
Now, speaking of the trigger laws here in Louisiana, some of the doctors, that one of the concerns that they have is that the trigger law, it does say that women can have an abortion if it's for the if it risks the mother's life, but they fear prosecution if they make the decision over when a mother should terminate the pregnancy. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that needs to be sorted out. I'm a physician. I can totally understand why somebody would be concerned about uncertainty. On the other hand, in medicine, we have things, for example, if someone comes to the emergency room and you think that they have to be, they're a risk to themselves or others. Well, there's a certain procedure doctors go through that protects them legally, but also allows them to protect the person who's in question. And within a certain amount of time, that decision has to be reviewed. So there's processes that can be worked through. We have systems that do that. I'm sure it can be done on this too.
What's your just reaction on the state Supreme Court rejecting the AG's ban to actually enforce the trigger laws? The hearing is set for tomorrow, though.
I don't think that he rejected it. I think they did not override the state.
Right.
So it just means they want to hear the information.
Right.
And it's a legal process. Let it play out.
Now let's move on to gun control, where of course you help help create the bipartisan legislation to create gun controls, but the Biden administration is once again calling for an assault weapons ban given the shooting that happened outside of Chicago. Do you think it is now time to ban assault weapons?
I don't. Let's just first say that the law we passed, one, the tragedy in Highland Park is awful, as awful as the one in Uvalde. And so we passed a law which protects Second Amendment rights for the law-abiding, but provides resources that can prevent another mass shooting like this. Indeed, it's possible that these resources could have helped prevent Highland Park. And it will prevent others that will never know that they prevented because they never happened. But at some point, you need personal responsibility. This family knew this young man was a risk to himself and to others, and yet the father helped him buy a weapon. Now, we need personal responsibility, not just for someone, don't shoot things up, that's a given, but for the family that would say, wait a second, our son has had knives confiscated from him. We called the police because he threatened us, threatened others, threatened himself. He should not get a weapon.
Right.
Now, until there's personal responsibility, we're never going to stop these crimes.
Okay.
So we have a law which protects Second Amendment rights, which provides resources to prevent these crimes in the future, but any law will be defeated if there is no personal responsibility.
I do want to go back to the fact that I do know you mentioned that you do not support the banning of assault weapons, but Democrats argue that back when the assault weapons were banned back in the 90s, that mass shootings went down. So they say that there's proof that if you ban assault weapons, that mass shootings won't happen. What do you say to that?
Most of the literature shows that that's not the case. They have one article which suggests it does. There's many more that shows that it doesn't. But by the way, there's, I'm told, like 20 million or maybe more so-called assault weapons that have been sold. And so are you going to go and confiscate them? Hey, Reggie, boom, give me your weapon. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just be realistic here. But let's go back to what will solve it. One, we have a law which protects Second Amendment rights for the law-abiding, but provides resources to help prevent these sorts of shootings, number one. But number two, we need some personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility.
All the laws in the world will not keep somebody from doing something terrible if we don't have personal responsibility.
And real quickly, I know that you're here because you're going to be at the groundbreaking at Jones Creek. So just talk about how that's going to impact, especially since we're now in hurricane season.
Yeah, so I'm kind of dressed a little bit less formally. Jones Creek groundbreaking to help do channel improvements so it's a better way to get floodwaters away from our homes. And this money was appropriated in 2018 by the federal government, but there's going to be billions more coming to our state, billions more to mitigate your risk of flooding, for coastal restoration, to make our homes safer. We need to have that, to make our homes safer away from flooding, to make a family's life more stable, to make our place a better place to live.
Senator Cassidy, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Reggie.
All right, Senator Cassidy will have his hands full going back to Washington, it looks like. Up next, we'll have a look at the week ahead on your local election headquarters. Stay with us.
This is your local election headquarters.
All right, looking ahead to the coming week, the Baton Rouge Press Club will be hosting the UL System President. That's Jim Henderson. He'll provide an update on the campuses. That will be tomorrow at noon. On Tuesday, the Climate Initiatives Task Force will meet at the Capitol. That'll happen at 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.